Hi guys, so today we are going to be talking about gouache again, and this is kind of like my updated gouache process because the last video I was just kind of getting used to the medium and it was also more of like a study piece. This is more of a finished piece. So anyway, I've had time, like a few months now, to kind of refine and figure out how I like using gouache, and by all means this isn't like don't consider myself a pro at gouache. I'm definitely still a work in progress. I have so much more that I want to learn with the medium, but right now at this stage, this is kind of my process and how I approach a piece with gouache. So I guess the first thing I want to cover is just what is gouache exactly, and it's basically watercolor but more opaque. So you use it just like watercolors, and like the more water you add in, the more sheer the paint becomes. And you can actually make gouache pretty sheer if you add a lot of water. But it could also be like 100% opaque if you only add a little water or no water. So gouache really gives you a lot of options to play with transparencies. Have seen a lot of people who will use gouache very much like watercolors and use them very, very watered down. I have seen other people use gouache very, very opaque. I tend to use it pretty opaque just because that's what I like. Or you can use it as a mixture of the two. You can have transparent layers and then put opaque layers on top of that. So there's a lot to play with. And then another characteristic of gouache is that it dries to like this beautiful velvety matte texture. And that is really unique to the medium. And one thing that I really, really enjoy about gouache is that you can get those like beautiful flat color layers. It's so fun. So for my process, I like to start by putting down just pretty flat colors. I like to just use this as a way to kind of block in my color scheme and get an idea for sort of how the piece is going to look overall with colors. And usually these will just be flat layers, but I did add a little bit of a gradient in the ponytail of her hair for this one. And actually I tend to keep these first layers slightly more sheer and transparent than the rest of the painting, just so I can still kind of see the pencil lines like of her face and the features and the hair and everything that I worked so hard with putting in there with the pencil, just so that I kind of know where everything is when I start putting in the shadows. And that's another thing about gouache that I want to point out. At least with your standard regular gouache, it's best to work with your most transparent layers at the bottom and your most opaque layers at the top. And that's because gouache will actually reactivate with water. So if you have a layer down and you go over it with a very watered down paint, it will actually start reactivating the layers underneath, and you'll be just smudging them around, and it could potentially just mess up everything that you worked so hard on your layers below. So definitely work from your sheer layers up to your opaque layers. This is actually not the case if you're using acrylic gouache or acrylic gouache. That type of gouache will not reactivate. Once it's down on the paper, it's not gonna budge. It's not personally a medium that I have any experience with, but it's something that I really, really, really want to try. I've been saving up to invest in a good set of acrylic gouaches, so hopefully I'll get to that soon. Okay, back to the process. So basically, once I have the flat color layers down, I kind of focus in on one section at a time and just work that section as much as I can, adding shading and shadows and all of that kind of fun stuff. So you saw here the first thing I started working on was the skin, and I like to focus on things like the lowest point of the drawing first. So like the skin is being overlapped by both the shirt and her hair, so I can put a lot of details on that, and if I kind of go over the lines a little bit when I get to doing the hair or when I get to doing the shirt, I can just kind of fix that up because gouache is opaque. Another benefit about gouache, if you mess up, just go over it with paint and it's gone. It's great. But anyway, with the shading, I kind of like to work with flat colors and build it up in layers. So first I'll kind of go through, like with the skin, I did like a soft peachy pink, start with like the most subtle colors first, and then I'll go in with like a more redder color and then like a bluer color for the shadows. I always like to mix in some kind of blue for my shadows, like the really deep shadows. I always find that with gouache, at least for me, it creates a really sort of nice looking shadow. And I have two paints that I will use for that in the set that I'm doing right now. One of them is, I think the color is called Sky Blue, and the other one, if I'm doing more darker shadow, Prussian Blue is one of my favorite colors to create shading with. While we're sort of on the topic of colors, one thing that has been helping me a lot with gouache and sort of painting in general is limiting my color palette. So like for this one, I pretty much just stuck with 3 colors. I think it was like the apricot color, the vermilion, and the burnt sienna. And then I kind of use white is a pretty standard with gouache. You need to add that in to make more sort of lighter pastel shades. And then I add in those 2 blues to create shadows. So pretty much this whole painting was done with just a few paints. And that personally helps me a lot. Like, I'm the kind of person who gets overwhelmed with huge sets of paint. I like to keep it pretty simple, and you can actually create a lot of different color variations with only like a palette of a couple paints. So if you're having trouble with that, that's something that's helped me a lot. So I don't know, maybe it would help you. Give it a shot. But anyway, I personally haven't found like a super good way to blend with gouache, like creating like a super smooth transition between the paint colors. I just haven't been able to figure it out yet. I mean, that's what I really do like, this kind of layered blocks of color type look, but I have seen Audra Auclair do a technique on Instagram where she will get like this fluffy or a flat top brush that's dry and kind of use it to manipulate the wet paint on the paper and kind of buff them together almost. But it's not a technique I've tried. I actually don't have the brush for it right now, but it is something that I want to try. Next time I find myself at the art store, I'm gonna pick up a brush like that and give it a go, and I can update you guys if it ends up working. That's pretty much it, guys. I don't really have like a super technical approach when it comes to gouache, honestly. I don't really have a super technical approach when it comes to art in general. You know, I really just kind of put paint down on paper and see what happens, and if I like it, then I keep it. If I don't like it, I put more paint over top of it so I don't have to look at it anymore. But yeah, so I hope this was helpful a little bit. I definitely am still learning sort of gouache techniques, but this is my process so far. I probably should have said this at the beginning of the video, but I am using my Arteza gouache paints today. I have their 24 set, and honestly, they're really great. I've had a lot more chance to play with them since my last video, and I can honestly say that I still really love them. I mean, they're pretty much the only gouache paints I'm using right now, so would recommend, even after all of these sort of trials. I call them a pretty standard student grade paint. So you get a pretty good quality paint, and they're also really affordable, which is great. So if gouache is something you want to kind of try, I would definitely recommend the Arteza set, because you are getting pretty good quality paints, and you're also getting, you know, something that's, you're not gonna, you know, waste all your money and on something you don't even know if you like or not, you know. So definitely really good paints for beginners, but they're also the kind of paint that's gonna be able to take you beyond that once you kind of start learning and everything. So yeah, if you do want to try out Arteza paints, I do have a discount code in the description that Arteza awesomely gave me to give you guys, and it's Chelsea Gracei 3, and you're gonna get 10% off your order at Arteza. So if you want to try some paints, there's a discount code. Yay! That's about it for this video. So I guess I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!